All right, y'all. Hey, come on. This is Dr. and Evangelist K.O. Rich with Narc Abuse No More, where we're here to help you admit what you feel in order to heal from the effects of narcissistic abuse. How is everyone doing today? I pray that you all are doing well on this Friday with our Narcissistic Abuse No More podcast. This is your host, Dr. K.L. Rich, and I pray that you are having a blessed and wonderful day today on this Friday, May the 11th of, actually, no, not May the 11th, May the 10th. May the 10th, I'm a day in advance. May the 10th of 2024. I pray that your week has been stress-free, narcissistic-free, abuse-free week so far, and that the remainder of this weekend will continue to be so as well. But if not, we're going to be talking about a few things today. I am happy to have with us today Pastor Rebecca Craig, who has a new book called Once Upon a Nightmare. Once Upon a Nightmare. And this is looking through the glass of narcissistic abuse, being married to a narcissist. So, Pastor Rebecca, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dr. Rich. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and thank you for reaching out. Pastor Rebecca reached out to me and told me about her book that she had just published, and so I'm excited to be talking about this book today, and I pray that it's going to be helpful for a lot of people who are tuning in to this podcast. And if you have not shared any of these podcasts, please take the time today to share this podcast so that others may get this valuable information that you're going to be listening to today with Pastor Rebecca. And one thing that we know is that dealing with narcissism, it really takes a lot out of you. And as we see here today, Pastor Rebecca is going to be giving her own experience with dealing with being married to a narcissist and even being in ministry and dealing with a lot of things today. So today, we just going to take some time to ask a few questions, and as we go through the book and as Pastor Rebecca give us some insight as to what actually inspired her to write this book. So Pastor Rebecca, today, go ahead and let us know what gave you the inspiration for this book. And again, the title of the book for everyone is Once Upon a Nightmare. So Pastor Rebecca, what gave you the inspiration to write this book?
Yeah, so there were a couple of things that gave me inspiration for this, and one of them, of course, was when I was going through the divorce process. I had tons of people who were around me at the time kind of going, this is like a Lifetime movie. And, and I was like, yeah, but there's no way I'm telling this story publicly kind of situation, because when you're dealing with narcissists, you have no ability to do that because they're going to drag you into court and do all kinds of things like that. So it wasn't until he passed away that I was able to even think about doing something like this. And what wound up being the real impetus for it was, I'm also an artist and I paint. And a lot of the paintings I did during my time of kind of going through this abusive period and where my life was just kind of in chaos, what centered me most was being able to express myself visually through my art. So I made a bunch of art, and I was sharing that art one day with another pastor friend of mine at lunch, and I had little blogs that kind of went along with my art, and it had to do with dealing with narcissistic abuse. And so she made the comment that I should really do speaking engagements and take my art with me and do art shows.
Wow.
And I said, okay, that seems like that's really hard to get into and do. What if I wrote a book instead? And she was all, yeah, that's what you should do. Go ahead and write this book that contains your artwork and kind of, talks about the artwork. And then it kind of morphed into just a full memoir about my life in general for the first couple of chapters. And then I get into, kind of what led me to getting into this kind of a relationship, how other relationships had kind of, I guess you might say, primed me for it and made me susceptible, and where I was going in my life and how I wound up in that kind of situation. And just this friend of mine just kept encouraging me, saying, this is going to help people. I really think it's going to help them. Whether they're somebody who's going through it themselves or whether they're a family member who is watching a loved one go through this, I think your insights and especially your theological background of being able to talk about this from a pastor's perspective who's gone through this and is able to say, this kind of marriage is not okay. This what's going on in this marriage is not okay. And this is not the kind of abusive situation that God wants you to be in. So that was kind of how my book came about. And I just sat down, started writing it, and went from there.
So I see here that you had attended seminary. And so you talked about when you were in seminary for us writing the story, telling the story. And so this helped you to be able to tell, your background helped you to be able to tell your story as to what had taken place with you. And as you mentioned before, you waited to circumstances allow for you to be able to tell this story, or to at least publish it, because oftentimes narcissists will try to take revenge, as you mentioned, by trying to haul you to court based upon you telling the truth. and so that is one of the things that you definitely have to be careful of, when you are writing, is to be careful of that narcissist that would be vengeful for you even telling the truth. So I want to mention about how the title came about, because within your book you have a lot of when it comes to Disney, and so tell a little background about the Disney with you working for Disney, and then the why you use Disney in order to be able to relay your message to others to help people understand when they read the book.
Yeah, so like you mentioned, before I became a pastor, I worked for Disney feature animation out in Burbank in story development, and I just had always had a love for fairy tales. And one of the interesting things I always discovered as an employee of Disney feature animation was, you don't ever tell the original fairy tale. You alter it, because you have to realize that a lot of these fairy tales in their original format are not really great stories for kids. They've got some really dark elements to them, and so they get changed and adjusted, and people are always like, oh, they've really strayed from what the original fairy tale story was. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, but you don't really want to tell the story of the Little Mermaid to kids as it is, because the end of that story is, not only does she not get the guy, she winds up killing herself. And I'm like, I don't really think that's the story Disney wants to tell. Right. So they change it. Mm-hmm. But I always had this proclivity for fairy tales and art, obviously, as an artist. And the melding of kind of those two worlds when I worked at animation was I got to do kind of the art plus the story element of it. And so as I kind of moved out of that realm of my life, I would say that the fairy tale part of it kind of stuck with me as I continued into becoming a pastor. And a lot of my artwork still has sort of this sort of whimsy, you might call to it. And so that was kind of the style I was using when I was working through a lot of my stuff. So I started kind of saying, trying to figure out, okay, how do these two worlds mesh? How does the fairy tale, that I wanted for my life in general, I wanted that happily ever after that we always think about.
Right.
That's how Disney movies always end.
Right. And I think they often set little girls up. I've said this before. I think they set they set little girls up because you feel like, oh, I'm gonna meet my Prince Charming and he's gonna come and ride in and save the day, and we're just gonna go into the sunset and live happily ever after, and then reality hits.
Right.
Right.
What Disney really ought to do is they ought to, when they're doing all these live action reboots, they ought to, instead of just rebooting what they did that was the animated for kids kind of thing, is they ought to tell the actual original story when they do those live actions. It's more for adults to go, hey, this is how this story actually goes.
Right.
I'm sure they're going to take my advice on that.
Right. They're like, I don't think so. But yeah, that would be because you really, I remember I used to love Disney movies, Beauty and the Beast and Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, and you just have this hope as a little child that, oh, I'm gonna meet my Prince Charming, and I mean, and this is not to say that maybe somebody did get their fairy tale, all right, but then oftentimes life can be anything but a fairy tale. And so so I want to ask you, when it comes to what you wanted in a relationship, where did you see yourself maybe in your earlier years? What did you thought you were going to have, and what did you wind up having?
So, I mean, I grew up from the time I was literally 2 years old. I told my parents that I was going to have a little boy and a little girl, just like they did. And but first I had to find me a man. Because apparently I, at 2 years old, understood how that worked. So I'm actually kind of proud of myself at 2 that I got that. So I just always had, my parents had a really good marriage and still have a really good marriage. They're still going strong, 50 some years later. And they are the fairy tale. Let's put it that way. They love each other at 78 years old, and I wanted that. I wanted that same thing, and that's what I wanted for my life. And to have that person that you share life with, and that is your best friend, and that you do those, you just share life with. And so for me, that was always the goal, is just I want that person, that other side of whoever I am, that helps you through life and that is there for you. And so I had that modeled for me. I didn't come out of a dysfunctional family, at least not any more dysfunctional than anybody else. And I had a pretty good childhood. And so I wasn't coming out of like this abusive situation. So I'm just repeating like what I was brought up in, because that happens a lot.
Right.
You gravitate to what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trying to gravitate to what I knew, which was actually rather healthy relationships. And for whatever reason, all I kept getting into were controlling, abusive, bad relationships. And, to this day, I haven't quite figured out what that's about. But that was kind of my history of who I dated. And so by the time I was 38, I was still single at 38. and was kind of going, well, now what?
Right.
This whole I'm going to have myself a little boy and a little girl dream was going bye-bye real fast. In fact, I went to a gynecologist when I was like 36, and she just out of the blue says, well, if you ever want to have children, you really need to start doing it now. And I was like, thanks, needed to hear that.
I can relate.
Yeah, I just sort of looked at her and I said, yeah, that would be great. I'm missing a vital part of making that happen, however. So when I was 38, and by then I was a pastor, and let's just say dating when you are a female pastor comes with its own set of challenges, because apparently I didn't have enough challenges in my life. I felt that was just an added element I had to put out there. So I eventually wound up dating this guy who lived about 3 hours away from me when I was 38 years old, who he really sort of accepted what I did. And I don't know if you've ever tried any of the online dating stuff, but it's 9 times out of 10 what you get is people just looking to hook up.
Yeah, I did that years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not me. And so the second that conversation starts to lean that direction, I usually bow out. I'm like, I'm done. This isn't who I'm looking for. I'm looking for somebody who is going to care about who I am.
Right.
And the rest of that will come later. And so he was interested in the things I was interested in, or if he had not ever done that or been interested in it, he was like, hey, teach me about it. I'd like to learn, blah, blah, blah. So that's how I got sucked into this. Was he was paying attention and was this person who not only did he accept what I did for a living, he was showing interest in what I loved, to do, and encouraged me in my career. He encouraged me in my hobbies, all of that kind of stuff. So I didn't really, at least on, from that level, ever get the sense that this was going to turn into something abusive and bad. And because what I wanted, he wanted, he's like, yeah, he'd had another daughter early on when he was like 20 years old. And so she was 16 by when we met. And I was a little nervous about that as well, because I'm like, I don't know that I'm ready to jump in and be the mother of a 16-year-old, because that's a fun age.
Right.
But, he really kind of talked me into it, so to speak.
So he was charming.
He was charming.
And that's what...
and my biological clock was ticking. I was like, hey, I'm 38 years old. If I'm going to do this and we're going to have a family, then this needs to happen soon.
Okay.
So I didn't even blink when 5 months in, he's asking me to marry him. Because I'm like, of course, yeah, we need to do this, because we need to, if we're going to do what we want to do in terms of family, we have to get working on that. And, of course, being a pastor, you don't live together or do anything like that. So the next step was marriage. And so by 10 months after we met, we were married.
So let me ask a question. Were there any subtle signs that you could say that may have been maybe some yellow lights showing maybe warning, slow down, or was now that you look back, hindsight? So what were some of those things that you saw that you can say now was like, I really should have been paying attention to that? What is it that you saw then that you can say now that you may not have seen then, or you may have seen it but you just threw it off?
So I think the number one thing that was sort of the red flag, as I already mentioned, was he did have a daughter, which in and of itself is not a problem. but she had some, I'm not going to go too much into it, but she had some of her own issues. And I don't think I ever stopped to ask where those issues stemmed from beyond I knew her mother had been a train wreck. But I didn't ever stop to ask if the fact that she was living with this man might have also been a part of what her problems were.
Okay.
And so there was red flag number one that I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to. And also the fact that he kind of sprang things on me a lot, that we talked about the fact that I wasn't even going to meet her until we were much further into the relationship. And on date 3, I'm almost all the way to where I was going to meet him, which is 3 hours away. And he calls me and tells me, oh, by the way, my daughter and my best friend are joining us for dinner. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? That, it was sort of that was sprung on me and freaked me out. Because I was like, wait, this is way too early to be meeting your best friend and your daughter.
Right.
So, my instinct was to turn around and leave and just be done. And I probably should have done that. But that's not really who I am. I override that instinct a lot of times by going, you're being ridiculous. This is silly. Just go forward. Do this. One of the other red flags that I probably should have picked up on was the way he talked about his mother.
Okay.
I don't think I put any of that in the book, but he didn't. He was not someone who talked very lovingly about his mother. And that should have been an immediate red flag of, wait a minute, why do you speak so terribly of this woman? Because when I met her, she seemed fine. But I was like, oh, maybe I just don't know. There's something I don't know about. And the third red flag was after we got engaged, he got into a fight with his daughter. And that was maybe one of the scariest things I had ever witnessed, was just the way he screamed and yelled at her. And I got in my car and I drove 3 hours back to where I was living and was like, we're done. This is over. And he drove out to because I wasn't answering my phone or whatever. I was like, I need time to think, because this was not a good situation. And he drove all the way out and, knocking on my door, wanted to talk, all of that kind of stuff, and eventually kind of talked me out of thinking that what I had witnessed was all that bad.
So basically he gaslit you. And
yes.
Gaslit you to make you think, doubt your reality and
right.
Everything.
This was normal. This was not this wasn't a bad thing. Blah blah blah. And those red flags right there should have been what made me go, okay, you know what? No. Now, what wound up happening too was, in this case, I think I was blinded to a lot of his behavior because he used his daughter's behavior as kind of a shield. Where it was her acting out, it was her doing things. She got blamed for a lot of stuff. And I don't think I realized where all that was coming from. And that should have been something I paid a little closer attention to.
So one thing I want to mention when it comes to narcissists, for those who are listening, and right now we're talking about those warning signs that, in hindsight, that now you can say, okay, this is something that I should have been paying attention to, is to pay close attention to when you're dealing with a narcissist. They want to kind of, I'm going to say, seal the deal. So basically, when he sprung on you about his daughter and the best friend, it was kind of pressuring you to like seal the deal for this type of relationship, because it's like they go for the kill and they try to capture you before you have a chance to say, okay, I don't think I want to get in this relationship. Would you say that that's kind of what happened with you?
Yes, yeah, I really do.
Yeah. And
I mean, yeah, I can't say what might or might not have happened had that not happened as rapidly as it did. That, maybe I would have seen him,
mm-hmm.
just him, a little clearer without all those added elements.
Right. So it's kind of like a pressure effect. And so for anyone who's listening, be very careful if you're feeling pressure to meet the family, pressure to invite them to meet yours. Take your time. If you feel that things are not right, make sure that you follow your God-given instinct. Another thing I want to mention that you just you spoke about is the mother issues. If I often tell people, pay attention to how they talk about even their exes or their mothers or people in their family or relationships that they've been in, because sometimes it could be, you can tell from the way that they talk that there's some unresolved issues there, which can be brought into that relationship. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%, and especially looking at some of the past relationships. And let's just say I was not his normal in terms of who he dated. I believe his previous girlfriend before that had been she'd been a stripper.
Oh.
So
what? Okay.
Yeah, but from my perspective, I'm like, look, I'm a pastor,
okay.
and part of what I do as a Christian
mm-hmm.
is, people make mistakes,
mm-hmm.
and you forgive, and you give, second chances and things like that. And I don't want to demonize someone who is in the situation if that's
right.
what they're doing for a living. I mean, I didn't know her story. I don't know why she was doing that. I didn't want to judge.
Right.
It was look, I don't want to judge that. I want to base this relationship on what our relationship is, not what your previous relationship with this other person might have been.
But one thing I will say though is sometimes one thing narcissists will play on is your ability to empathize.
Yes.
And they play on that because they know that you might not be this judgmental person, and you want to give people a chance, and they use it where it's actually a strength. They use it as a weakness for them.
Right. And so that there's two types that they're going to target. Number one is like the woman who was the stripper, where it's somebody you can easily say she is not a good source of information. You can smear her, and people are going to she's not a reliable source, so to speak. So it's very easy for them to get into those kinds of relationships, and when they start complaining about his behavior or whatever, it's like, well, come on, she's a stripper. What do you want? Are you really going to believe her? And so there's that credibility factor that they a lot of times target in terms of they find people that aren't going to believe.
Right.
In my case, he was already in a situation where he needed a shield. He needed somebody that he could hide behind, because unbeknownst to me, he was in the midst of some pretty big legal problems that were not showing up on any kind of a background check, because he hadn't actually been charged with anything yet. So, didn't know about it, when I was initially dating and whatever. And what wound up happening was he kind of mentioned at one point that he had run into some trouble over his mortgage and things like that. And it had gotten him into some difficulties with what was going on, and he was fighting a foreclosure. and he'd lost his temper and he got in some trouble over that and blah, blah, blah. But it was all very reasonable and whatever. And it was, something is like, this is something that happened 5 years ago. It was just a little misdemeanor, not a big deal. And I was like, all right, whatever, okay. Not like I hadn't dated guys who had, little misdemeanors before. I'm like, yeah, okay. I dated a couple of guys who've been arrested for shoplifting or something like that. Now, granted, those guys were not gems, and I really probably should not have been in relationships with them either. And maybe that should have been my clue. that oh, hey, wait a minute, red flag. Maybe that's a problem, but we were so far along in the relationship by then. I just kind of, whatever. So it was a situation where he literally needed me. So he was not only playing on my empathy, but he needed to get married to me really quickly because he needed the shield of being married to the pastor in this community kind of situation.
So he wanted that status. He wanted someone to make his basically, so his indiscretions by him marrying a pastor was going to basically change that. That was a come up for him.
Yeah.
Where now he'll be this I guess this upstanding citizen in society. And so he played on you for your empathy, your seeing the best in people and wanting to give a chance, not wanting to judge and everything. So he played on that. And as you mentioned before, it can go either way. They can choose someone who they feel is basically relying upon them. For it's like the stripper, for example, don't know her background, anything like that, but just saying that this might be somebody who may need them in that the same sense as he needed you.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the ways in which that all then got played out was when he would get into one of his verbal fights with somebody, and if I had been involved in any way, shape, or form, like I'd made a statement or something, he would immediately go, my wife is a pastor, are you calling her a liar?
Wow.
Yeah, there would be that kind of thing. It's like, my wife's a pastor, do you really think blah, blah, blah? And so he was using that as that status, as that, and I'll be completely honest, my status as a pastor in the community, I think, did make things for him go very much more on the lenient side, especially when it came to the court system. Because once he was getting carted off to federal prison and doing that kind of stuff, they really worked hard and showed me some deference while we were married. And
we're gonna get to that in just a moment, because I want to go deeper into that as to when things really start changing when it came to the marriage. When did you find out you were married to this person that was not what you thought he was, and the dynamics of him even going to prison. So we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back. Again, the book is called Once Upon a Nightmare by Rebecca Craig. And can you tell me before we go into break where they can purchase this book at?
Yes, it will be available on Amazon for order on May 28th. It releases May 28th.
So remember, May 28th, Amazon.com. And I will be on our upcoming podcast. I will be making sure to still mention the release date of this book, so you all would not forget that. That's on. It's going to be available on Amazon May the 28th. All right, we'll be right back in just a moment.
intimate prayer. When I found you, I found what every heart dreams of. When I found you, I found love. When I found you, I found the rest of my life. When I found you, I told all others goodbye. When I found you, I saw my fears fly away like a dove. When I found you, I found love. I know true love sounds crazy, worth waiting for. You are the one, my only, forevermore. When I found you, I found my fate in your arms. When I found you, I found no cause for alarm. When I found you, I knew this love was a gift from above. When I found you, I found love. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know true love sounds crazy, worth waiting for. You are the one, my only, forevermore. When I found you, I found a scholar with style. When I found you, found one more reason to smile. When I found you, I knew I finally found enough. When I found you, I found love. Yeah, I did. When I found you, I found love. When I found you, I found love. I found love.
And that is BB Wine and I Found Love. I love that song. The only thing I found is puppies and dogs. Okay. Oh my goodness.
I love my puppies though.
Hey, I love my puppy, my dogs and cats, but I say that's about all I'm gonna have. I'm gonna be the old cat lady. But
I always figure I'm going to be there for a while in my life. I was like, I'm the psycho cat lady. That's who I'm going to be.
That's funny. But hey, you know what? Sometimes you have more peace with animals than you do with a human being.
Oh, let me tell you.
Yes, yes, yes. Again, we are with author, Pastor Rebecca Craig, with her new book, Once Upon a Nightmare, and what she thought was going to be her fairy tale romance, her fairy tale marriage turned out to be a nightmare. So we left off where we were going to go into the beginning of when things began to change. When did you notice and start realizing something was wrong? So I'm going to let you go on from there.
Yeah, so it's complicated. It's hard to say when exactly I noticed. Like I said, I probably noticed that first argument that he had with his daughter. That was probably when I really started saying, wait a minute, there's something a little wonky here. But that wasn't enough to make me not marry him. So it was then, I think the real wake-up call was the day I got the text message from him saying I'm in jail. And I was like, what kind of joke is this? And discovered he had 12 federal marshals apparently had shown up at his work and arrested him. And I was floored. I had no idea what was going on, what he'd done, what had happened. And I was completely flabbergasted and I was just a wreck because I had no idea. And obviously that's when you start realizing there's something very wrong going on. But of course, once he kind of got out, all of this was not his fault. Of course.
Of course.
It was not his fault. And was producing all the paperwork and the emails and everything else to prove to me that he had been the one who had been wronged. He had been wronged, and they were railroading him, and he was being unjustly prosecuted, and blah blah blah. And me being me and in love and whatever, I was kind of willing to listen to that. And so for a while I became, I'm sure you're familiar with this term, probably what you would call an enabler. Because he had me convinced that what was happening to him was wrong. And he was not really the one at fault.
So basically you were you trauma bonded with him.
Yes.
Based upon him saying, portraying himself as the victim, the system's against him, he's been done wrong, this shouldn't be happening, and you were wanting to be that supportive spouse. Now, when did that change for you, for us understanding that, no, this is a lot deeper and than what he's saying?
Yeah, there was a progression of, I guess you would call it, awakening to this issue. And after he got arrested and came home on house arrest for 4 months. And that 4 months was me getting to kind of see him balk at authority and how he did not handle that in any way, shape, or form very well. That they were dictating where he could go and what he could do. And I'm the kind of person, I'm like going, just do what they tell you. I'm like, let's get this over and done with. Just do what they tell you, and you'll be done, and you'll be out of here, and you don't have to deal with this anymore. And he couldn't do it. He could not follow the rules. Because as anybody who's familiar with a narcissist knows, narcissists do not follow rules. They don't apply to them.
No, rules are for thee, but not for me, as it in the mind of the narcissist. Right.
Yes. So he believed these rules did not apply to him, that he had all these rights that he actually no longer had. And so there was this progression of just defying the system, defying what was being asked of him or told of him that he was supposed to do. Shouldn't say asked, they didn't really ask, they just told him this is what he was going to do. And he kept not wanting to do it. And eventually, he was trying to put off having to go to this basically, it's kind of like a halfway house type facility, because he violated his probation, of course, because he couldn't follow rules. And he spent 4 months with having his job basically send him out of town for 4 months so that he could keep putting this off by saying, oh, my work needs me to do this. And they wanted to keep him employed and blah, blah, blah. So they were being rather lenient with him on that until finally they were like, no, you need to go do this and get it over with. And he finally went, but of course he didn't bother checking to see when they do their orientation or anything along those lines, because once you're in there until they do the orientation, you can't go to work, you can't leave that facility. So the Saturday before Easter, he decides to go into this place, and they said, well, we don't do our orientation until Wednesday. And on, Wednesday is when we'll let you then go back to work. And he just said, that doesn't work for me, and left, and came waltzing through my front door Saturday evening right before worship. So I spent Easter Sunday, I kid you not, terrified federal marshals were going to come storm the church on Easter morning to arrest him. And so I had demanded about a week before this that we go to marriage counseling, because I couldn't do it anymore. I was like, I can't live like this. I can't live with the constant way in which you are just completely, constantly, always trying to not do what they tell you to do. And this just keeps going on and on. Instead of getting over, you just keep making it worse. So we need to go to some kind of counseling, because I'm about ready to call this quits. And
so let me ask you, did you, during the time, now how long were you all married?
We were only married, when it's all said and done, we were only married 2.5 years.
Okay, 2.5 years. And it doesn't take long for narcissists to mess anything up. So
No. The arrest came 7 months after we got married.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was 7 months into the marriage that arrest happened. And
let me ask, during that time, did he do anything for us, like what you would consider as verbal abuse, physical abuse, emotional? What would you say that you went through for us internally when with everything that you were going through with him at the time?
At this time, most of it was manipulation.
Okay.
Most of it was he needed me on his side. He needed me to be on his side and helping him. So he knew if he ever got physical with me, that would be the end of that. Because I had always told him, I said, you ever lay a hand on me, we are done.
Amen.
Yeah, I was like, I will not put up with that.
Okay, good. So how did that affect you as a pastor, with you dealing with these issues that you were going through with your husband? You're preaching, you're teaching, you're leading others. How did you feel as a pastor going through this situation, and what were the people's response to this?
So, I mean, it was embarrassing for one thing. And it was really, really hard, because he was doing all this stuff. And honestly, I didn't even know half of what he was doing, because he was apparently going around town, like screaming and yelling at people and abusing them, to the point that his own psychiatrist's office had a restraining order against him. I kid you not. And I didn't know a lot of that was going on, because when he would come home, he would treat me just, oh so sweet and nice and honey and blah, 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 until I ever would stand up to him and be like, no, what you did was wrong. And it was my loyalty got called into question.
Let me ask, what caused the psychiatrist to put a restraining order on him?
I honestly do not know exactly what happened. I did find a letter one time, after, I was going through the divorce and I was cleaning stuff out and going through paperwork and whatever. I did find a letter where he had been demanding that they pay him like $1 million, because he thought that they were unfairly treating him, because everybody does, and so they owed him $1 million for his time that they'd wasted and blah, blah, blah. I mean, that was just kind of his MO, was he would demand these outrageous amounts of money from people that, it was like, what on earth? So I think it had something to do with that. Basically, what happened was the report, it was a court ordered, so I had something most women don't get. I had a diagnosis.
Okay.
When he got arrested the first time, the judge was not convinced he was sane. And and he was like, I need a psych evaluation before we can even continue, because I don't know that he can stand trial.
So what did he do in the courtroom that the judge deemed as questioning his sanity?
It was not what he did in the courtroom.
Okay.
It was phone calls he made to the judge's office, because apparently, he had, during the course of our engagement or whatever, like I said, I didn't know about a lot of stuff, because when I did the initial background check, there had been no charges. Well, he got charged while we were, engaged, and he went to court and got it basically all pled down. It was felony, and he got it pled down to a misdemeanor and probation. And so, there was never any understanding that, that there was this huge looming thing that he had done that was in the background here. But apparently there was, because he had violated his probation. I knew nothing about it. And he was supposed to go to court. And my brother got sick and had what's known as a dissecting aorta. He lived up in Minneapolis. And I was like, I'm probably going to have to go with my mom up to Minneapolis this next week, because he might die. And he was like, oh, well, I'll come with you. And I said, no, you don't need to do that. I said, you've got work and whatever. I said, this is, my mom and I can handle this. If I need you, I'll let you know. Well, he took it upon himself to call the judge's office to try to get his hearing moved to a different day, because he had a family emergency. He needed to go with me to Minneapolis, which, I told him he didn't, but he was trying to get out of having to do this.
Right.
And when the judge told him no, apparently he made threats against the judge.
So, wow.
And was, making, would make statements like, well, somebody's leaving court in a body bag or something. And I was just like, are you kidding me?
Oh, wow. So no wonder the judge thought something was wrong, because he probably was like, well, who in their right mind would even try to threaten a judge knowing that you are about to stand trial for whatever?
Yeah, and I mean, it was crazy, and it was so bizarre, because when I went into that courtroom, there was another case of, like, some guy violated his probation the third time with drug whatever, and the judge seemed real like, okay, whatever, here's, don't do it again, let him go. And I'm like, oh, he seems pretty reasonable and lenient and whatever, this ought to go well. The minute my husband walked into that courtroom, the whole demeanor changed.
Wow.
The whole demeanor changed. Everybody got on edge, and he was mad. That judge was not a happy camper. And I just stood there, I was just looking at my mom like, what on earth did he do? That was the big question. I was like, what did he do?
Wow.
And it would be a long time before I ever really found out.
So we're going to take another quick break, but when we come back, I want to deal with forced divorce, what led to you deciding that you were going to go ahead and go through with the divorce, and then also deal with what he did in the end after that. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment.
together. Gonna let no man put us under. Love like this will stand the storm. Come wind, rain, and thunder. A love like this, oh, it will never, never pass away.
Mama could never repay. We paid for this love that we've come to know.
Brenda, I know just what you mean. Seems like the Lord has blessed us with a love that would make even Cupid wanna hang up his bow. Hey, yeah. Woo. Oh, for better.
All for worse,
In sickness,
all in hell,
I'm gonna love you if you're poor.
all in you, God, in a world, a love like this, it will never, never pass what God has put together, gonna let no man put us under. A love like this will stand the storm. Come wind, rain, or thunder. It will never, no, never. A love like this, it will never, no, never. A love like this,
It will never.
it will never, no, never pass away.
Everybody help me sing.
A love like this still does exist, and we thank the Lord for blessing us with it. A love like this still does exist, and we thank the Lord for blessing us with it. A love like this still does exist, and we thank the Lord for blessing us with it. A love like this still does exist, and we thank the Lord for blessing us with it.
I now pronounce you man and wife. You can kiss your bride.
And that is Phil and Brenda Nicholas, A Love Like This. All right, so we are still with our author, Pastor Rebecca Craig, with her new book, Once Upon a Nightmare. And this book will be released on May the 28th on Amazon.com. You can get it on Amazon.com May the 28th. And I want to thank Pastor Rebecca for just joining us today and sharing her story with us. And as we talk just a little bit longer about for us what led into her divorce, and then finally where she can go into what took place after that for us, the ending.
Yeah. So the moment that I finally realized I needed a divorce was when he got arrested. This is the second time.
Wow.
First time wasn't enough. It took twice for me. But as I said, we had gone to see a marriage counselor the week before that happened. before he was supposed to go to that RRC, that halfway house kind of facility, because I was at my wit's end. I was like, I don't know what to do. I'm a mess. I was an anxious mess at this point. And he just didn't seem to care that, how any of this was affecting me. And that was one of the questions the therapist asked. She was like, well, your wife is a pastor. She's, somebody in this community that holds some standing. Do you care what this is doing to her and to her reputation? And his response was, well, they're Christian. They got to forgive. And I just, it was sort of that moment of, are you kidding me? That is your view of this? And so the following Wednesday is when the federal marshals showed up at his work again and arrested him. I was a little more prepared this time.
Right.
didn't quite take me by surprise this time. I knew it was going to happen. It was just a question of when and where. And I went ahead and because we had a second appointment scheduled. So I went ahead and went to that second appointment that afternoon, because I was like, clearly I still need to talk to somebody. And my therapist, she just goes, so I don't normally get here this fast, but you do realize he's a sociopath, right? And that was it. That was the trigger word. I already had the diagnosis that he was a narcissist, but I didn't understand what that meant. And because within that diagnosis that they had done, they were kind of like, well, he's got some anger management issues that maybe, working in therapy in conjunction with his wife might help, blah, blah, blah. So I thought there was something that could be done, and that, we could maybe find our way out of this, and he could, work on changing and doing that kind of stuff. Because the great manipulation there was when he was sitting in his jail cell, was acknowledging he finally had a problem, but only I could help him get over that problem so that I wouldn't leave him.
Yeah, that's major manipulation there.
Oh yeah,
and even in therapy, they have to be very careful about that, because that was putting the work on you instead of saying, no, you have to deal with this issue so that you can have the type of marriage that you would want to, and more so for himself, to make sure that he helped himself to get better, but not to put that on you, where it was now if you're going to counseling and you two are working together on issues, that's one thing, but when you're dealing with narcissists, that's a whole different ball game.
Yeah. And like I said, I didn't really understand what narcissism was. I mean, this was back in 2012, and initially when I got that, I read his report, and so I didn't know what it meant. It was he had some axis B cluster disorders, like narcissistic-personality disorder, histrionic, and obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, which apparently is different than regular OCD, but that's beside the point. Anyway, so it was sitting in that office, and her using the word sociopath that just made me go, oh, I said there's no fixing that.
No.
There's no fixing that. There is no getting better from that. There is no, and it was in that moment that I just went, my life is never going to be any different than it is at this moment if I stay with him.
So that was like your aha moment, like, wow.
That was my, I mean, I was getting there anyway. I was already, obviously, the reason we were at a marriage counselor was because I'm like, I can't keep doing this. And my mother, she knew she couldn't just tell me to get divorced, because she knew I would tell, she was afraid that was going to make me go bye-bye, and not talk to her anymore. And so what she would do, instead of saying, you need to get divorced, she'd just go, yeah, I'm going to hang up now because I'm going to say something you won't like. So bye. So it was, like I said, it was just this moment of I can't. There's no fixing that.
Right.
And so then I had to go through the process of within myself of how do I deal with this in terms of, I made a commitment to this man. I took a vow. I said I was going to be with him through better for worse. Isn't this just the worst kind of situation? And, it's one of those things where what I would tell other women who came in that same position would have been, God does not want this for you. You need to get out. But to tell myself that was really, really hard.
Right.
And I thankfully had an amazing therapist who also had a very deep spiritual theological understanding, and I kind of go through in my book about some of the stuff she helped me dredge up and helped me utilize to understand what God really truly does want out of us, in terms of our relationships, and how death parts us doesn't always necessarily mean physical death. It can mean the death of a relationship.
And one thing you mentioned in your book about you mentioned some characters in the Bible who had been victimized, such as Tamar and Dinah, and who had been raped, and you mentioned about that God doesn't want us to be abused. So can you speak a little bit more on that? Because a lot of times, even those in the church, and we oftentimes in the church don't talk about abuse the way that it should be talked about. You hear about God doesn't want divorce, but no one talks about those things that lead to the divorce. So can you speak into that?
Yeah. So God wants us in our relationships, especially marriage relationships, to be edifying. That they're supposed to be edifying for both people involved. And they're supposed to be the joining together of, two people into one. And again, this is where my therapist really helped me out. She said, think of it more in terms of like multiplication. What do you get when you get 1 times 1? Well, you get 1. And she goes, but what happens if you bring somebody who's only really, half person kind of into this relationship? Well, then the relationship isn't a whole relationship, and you're only getting half a relationship. And if you're bringing 2 halves in, you're only getting, et cetera, et cetera. And if the person is kind of a black hole, like you get with a narcissist, what's 0 times 1? 0.
Right.
It's like there is no relationship. And remembering the fact that there are other parts to that vow. And that vow is to, at least in my case, part of that vow was to love, honor, and cherish. And there was never any loving, honoring, and cherishing going on.
Right.
It was all lies and manipulation from the get-go. So you really need to take a look at how that relationship, is that relationship really living into what God wants that relationship to be for both of you? And if the answer is no, this is abusive, this is a lie, this is not in any way, shape, or form a reflection, not even a dim reflection of what God wants in terms of a marital relationship, then you're not living into it anyway.
Right.
So, once it's not just a broken relationship, it's just this relationship does not even exist in the realm of what God is talking about and what God wants for that kind of committed relationship.
And when you think about in the Bible, God is a God of covenant. And so Israel, when you think about Israel and you read the stories in the Bible about Israel and Judah and how they broke covenant with God, then eventually God expelled them from the land. Okay.
Yep.
And so they were Israel was taken off by the Assyrians, and Judah by the Babylonians, and so they were expelled by the land because they were unfaithful. They had broken covenant with God. So at that point, you can even say there was a divorce in a sense,
Yeah.
and because they were unfaithful to the Lord. And so marriage is supposed to be a covenant between two individuals, and the marriage is supposed to exemplify or embody our relationship with God. But oftentimes when you're dealing with a narcissist, you even have to question, do any of them even have a relationship with God? Because if you had a relationship with God, then you wouldn't of course be able to do those narcissistic manipulative things that you do when that person is narcissistic and been in this relationship. So in other words, when you're married to a narcissist, you're pretty much in a party of one.
Yeah. So I was superfluous. I was a tool. I was not a partner. I was not someone that he loved and cared about. I had been a means to an end. And when you're a means to an end, that's not a relationship.
No.
That is not a marriage.
No.
So I had a pastor friend of mine who literally said one time to me, she goes, I couldn't even tell you if what you had qualifies as a marriage.
Yeah, just on paper, but
Yeah.
the essence of what a marriage is supposed to be. And then, I often tell people to read 1 Corinthians 13, and if you're not getting what is described as love in that chapter, then you're not in much of a relationship at all.
Love does not boast. I always laugh at that.
Yeah, it's not prideful, not easily angered.
Never boast. I'm like,
keeps no records of wrong. I was like, everything in that chapter is opposite of what a narcissist is.
Exactly.
Totally.
What's funny? I actually just preached on that text this weekend.
Okay.
Narcissist.
Confirmation. Yes. So everything that when you read the Word of God and it describes what love is, you say this and check that off. That narcissist is not this. They're not that. I mean, you could check it off because it's not on their list.
Yeah. So that's my big thing with when I talk with women about these kinds of relationships, where it's like, look, I mean, we can talk about it being broken all day long, but and it is, don't get me wrong, but it's also not really even a relationship.
Right.
It's it is so far gone.
Yeah, because they're so self-centered, and it's all about them. It's never a we. It's all about them. Now let me so you filed for divorce.
Yes.
Okay, so what happened leading to, we're running out of time, but what happened for us? I want to get to what he did at the end. So go a little bit into that if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, they can read in my book kind of the antics then that ensued after I filed for divorce, because obviously then the gloves came off.
Yeah.
And he went crazy. I mean,
yeah.
And I was very lucky that he went publicly crazy, because everybody saw it. Everybody was like, yeah, okay,
yeah.
This is wild.
And that's the thing, when you see it's good to have witnesses where people can say, no, it's not you, because one thing, when a lot of narcissists are covert narcissists, so
right.
Other people would not even believe the things that you're seeing the true monster behind the scenes, whereas in other people's eyes they have this this facade, this mask on. They're a chameleon, they blend in with their environment, so people like, no way this person is like this. But the only people that normally see it is the people that are subject to the target of their abuse. But the good thing was other people were able to witness firsthand what you were going through.
Right. Well, in some ways, it was sort of a reverse while we were married, where it was everybody else was seeing it, and he was making sure I was the one who didn't see it. So yeah, it was kind of a reverse situation, even though he did try to isolate me. Didn't work, but all that kind of stuff. But anyway, so we go through this crazy divorce that takes another 2 years. So we were married for 2.5 years. I filed for divorce at 2.5, and then it took another 2 years to actually get divorced.
Now, why did it take that long? Because that happens a lot of times when someone is trying to divorce a narcissist. What happened? What happened to drag it out?
What didn't happen? We went through 2 different judges because he couldn't, you will never get through with like the same judge usually, because he'll find something that he manages to get one of them removed for. And then he went through 3 different attorneys. The second one always makes me laugh, because that second attorney actually went to court one day and said, you are either letting me withdraw from this case and withdraw as counsel for him, or you will disbar me, because one way or another I am not representing him anymore. So,
and that's bad when your attorney wants to drop you, okay?
Yep.
Yeah. So he ticked off the judge. He ticked off the attorneys. They went through 3 attorneys. Okay.
Yep. We went through 2 judges, 3 attorneys, and multiple appeals and delays, because it was always a constant, this is wrong, or whatever. He once said all of my artwork was worth like, I think $3 million or something. And I was like, heck, I said, if he'll pay me $3 million, he can have everything. I don't care. I said, he can have it all for $3 million. It's his. So there was just ridiculousness, and there was all of the threats against my job. He threatened my bishop. He threatened, our synod attorney was writing emails to us saying, if anything ever happens to me, blame this dude. So I mean, there was just everything just unleashed and was crazy.
Wow.
And so the day, in the midst of that, I wound up having to move to a different state, because the attorney, or the senior pastor that I was working with, took another job, and I was what was called coterminous with him, which meant I had to leave when he left. So I had to move halfway across the country and still try to finish out this divorce. So that wound up costing me all kinds of money. The reason women don't get divorced from narcissists is because it is going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars.
Right.
Just in attorney fees.
And if you don't have a good one, and I mean, they can just, like you said, drag it on and on and on. And you're being re-victimized by just going through the court process, because the narcissist used that as another way to gain control, to manipulate the system, and therefore, this person who's trying to get away from them is being being re-victimized by this narcissist all over again.
Yeah, and then our second judge was getting near retirement. He was retiring at the end of the year, and he knew that there were going to be all these appeals once he came down with his decision. So I kid you not, he waited until December to do to finalize our divorce, because he didn't want to deal with the appeals.
Wow.
And I was so mad,
Yeah.
because I was like, this could have been wrapped up a long time ago, but the judge then drug it out because he didn't want to deal with them.
He knew how long it was going to be. So, okay, so we're running out of time. So what happened? What do you want to share at the end? And what do you want people to gain from this book? Again, the book is called Once Upon a Nightmare by Pastor Rebecca Craig, and it will be available on Amazon.com May the 28th. So as we're wrapping things up, what do you want people to know, and what do you want them to take from this book?
I want them to feel seen. Is kind of my primary thing, that I want them to know that they are not alone, and that this stuff that's happening to them is not okay, and that to be able to recognize it and to be able to say, oh my gosh, this isn't okay. And especially if they're married to one, to know that if they have the means and they have the ability and they can get out of that relationship, get out.
Yes.
Because that is not what God wants for you.
Amen.
And so that's the main thing I think I really want to impart to people.
And it is so important for people to understand that, and because oftentimes being as a Christian, people will feel, especially women, will feel like I'm trapped. I can't get out. I can't get divorced. God's gonna frown on me. And the thing is, God loves you, and God does not want you to be abused. Whether it's physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual, financial. He did not make you to be anybody's punching bag, whether that's physically or emotionally, verbally, or any other type of abuse. It is okay to say, you know what, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to go through this type of abuse anymore, and to say enough is enough and get out as safely as possible. And so I want to just thank Pastor Greg for just contacting me and letting me know about her book. And again, the book is called Once Upon a Nightmare, because it was a nightmare that she had gone through. And however, I'm glad that she found her freedom. And I would just really encourage you all to really get the book, and so that it can give you hope, and that you would know that you are not alone. So many people that go through narcissistic abuse often feel like they are alone, and they're the only ones that's going through this, or they don't even know what the narcissism is, and they just know something is wrong, something's not right, and so they're doubting themselves until they find out, oh wow, I didn't know that I was living with a narcissist, or I had been married to a narcissist. But you're not crazy. The person that's taking you through this, they're the ones that's dealing with the issue. And oftentimes those that wind up in therapy are the ones that have been victimized by these type of individuals. But guess what? You can get help. You don't have to go through it alone. Go to a good counselor, get you a support group. And one thing that that Pastor Rebecca had mentioned in the book was about the support system that she had, and she had a great support system. Correct, Pastor Greg? Yes.
I had a wonderful support.
That makes a huge difference. So today we're out of here today. Again, thank you, Pastor Greg, for joining us and letting us know about your book. And I pray that this podcast is a blessing to all of you, and that you will know your feelings do matter. This is Dr. K.O. Rich with Narc Abuse No More, helping you to admit what you feel in order to heal from the effects of narcissistic abuse. Until next time.